March 22, 1979, Studio One, NBC Burbank. 300 people sat in that audience. Millions watched from home. But what happened after the cameras stopped rolling, only 17 people ever witnessed. And every single one of them carried that secret to their graves. The Tonight Show taping that night had started perfectly. Johnny Carson walked through the curtain at 5:30 p.m. exactly, his trademark smile in place, his movements smooth and practiced after 17 years of doing this 5 nights a week. The monologue killed. Political jokes about Carter's energy crisis, a bit about gas lines that had the audience howling. Johnny was in complete control the way he always was, the way America expected him to be. Ed McMahon sat in his chair, laughing at every beat. The band played flawlessly. Everything was clockwork. Everything was perfect. But backstage, something was different. John Wayne had arrived early, very early. For a man who was famously punctual but never early, this was unusual. The Duke was 71 years old, battling stomach cancer that had already spread through his body. His doctors had given him less than a year. Everyone at NBC knew. Everyone pretended they didn't. Wayne sat in the green room alone, turning something over in his hands. A stage manager passed by and noticed what he was holding. An old military compass, Korean War era, the kind naval officers carried. The stage manager thought it was a prop for a story Wayne might tell on air. It wasn't. At 6:15 p.m., during the commercial break before Wayne's segment, Johnny walked past the green room. The door was open. Their eyes met. Wayne nodded once. Johnny nodded back. No words, just two old friends acknowledging each other. But something passed between them in that glance. Something heavy. Ed McMahon's voice boomed across the studio. Ladies and gentlemen, you know him as the Duke, as the star of over 170 films, as an American icon. Please welcome John Wayne. The audience erupted. Standing ovation, cheers, love, pure love for a dying legend making one of his final public appearances. Wayne walked out slowly, carefully, his body betraying the cancer eating through him. But his presence, that indefinable thing that made him larger than life, still filled the room. Johnny stood and shook his hand. The handshake lasted longer than usual. Both men held on just a moment too long, like neither wanted to let go. Wayne settled into the guest chair. The interview began. For the first 8 minutes, it was everything you'd expect. Wayne told stories about working with Howard Hawks. He did an impression of Dean Martin that made the audience laugh. He joked about getting old, about how his horse could outrun him now. Johnny fed him perfect setups. Wayne delivered perfect punchlines, two masters at work. But then something shifted. You wouldn't have noticed it if you weren't looking closely, but the crew noticed. The camera operators noticed. Ed McMahon definitely noticed. Johnny asked Wayne about his early career, about the films that made him famous. And Wayne, in that gravelly voice that had narrated American masculinity for 4 decades, said something that seemed completely innocent. You know, Johnny, I think about those young fellas who fought in Korea. I made all those war pictures, but those boys, they lived it for real. I was on a USO tour in Time 52, visited some naval ships off the coast, saw things that stuck with me. The words hung in the air, completely normal, nostalgic, the kind of thing Wayne had said 1,000 times before. But something happened to Johnny Carson's face, just for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression that the cameras caught but most viewers at home would never notice. His jaw tightened, his eyes flickered, his hand resting on his desk pressed down harder. Then, like a switch, the smile returned, perfect, professional, flawless. Those were brave men, Johnny said smoothly. Transitioning to another topic, Wayne kept talking. The interview continued. 9 more minutes of television gold. Wayne told a story about John Ford. Johnny laughed in all the right places. The audience was delighted. America was delighted. At 6:47 p.m., the segment ended. Wayne had been on for exactly 17 minutes. And we'll be right back after this, Johnny said to the camera. The red light went off. Cut. The director called. 3 minutes, everyone. And that's when it happened. Johnny Carson's face didn't just change, it collapsed. The smile didn't fade, it vanished, erased, like it had never existed. His eyes, which had been bright and animated 2 seconds earlier, went dark, completely dark, empty, hollow. His skin, which had looked healthy under the studio lights, turned gray, actually gray. His hands started trembling, not shaking, trembling like a current was running through them. He stood up from behind his desk, but his legs didn't seem to be working right. He grabbed the edge of the desk to steady himself. John Wayne watched this transformation happen in real time. The Duke's famous stoic expression cracked. His eyes went wide. His mouth opened slightly. "Johnny," Wayne said quietly. Johnny didn't respond. He was staring at nothing, at something only he could see. His breathing had changed, short and shallow, like he was trying to get air through a collapsed lung. Ed McMahon jumped up from his chair. "Johnny, what's wrong?" Still no response. Carson's eyes were fixed on some point in the middle distance. The audience started to notice something was wrong. The murmur of conversation died. 300 people watching a man have some kind of breakdown 3 feet in front of them. Fred de Cordova, the show's producer, rushed onto the stage from the wings. "Johnny, talk to us. What's happening?" Johnny's mouth opened. No sound came out. He tried again. Nothing. His hand went to his throat, like he was checking if he could still breathe. Wayne stood up slowly, carefully, and walked over to where Johnny was standing. The Duke put his hand on Johnny's shoulder. "Pilgrim," he said softly, using his famous catchphrase like a lifeline. "Johnny, look at me." Carson's eyes finally moved. They locked onto Wayne's face, and what John Wayne saw in his friend's eyes in that moment made the toughest man in Hollywood take a step back. Terror. Pure, absolute, childlike terror. Not fear. Terror. The kind of terror that comes from seeing something so horrific your brain tries to shut down rather than process it. Johnny's lips were moving now, forming words, but no sound was coming out. Wayne leaned in closer, trying to hear, and then, barely a whisper, Johnny said 3 words. "The water. Red." Wayne's face went pale. He turned to Fred de Cordova. "Clear the studio. Now." "What? John, we're in the middle of—" "Clear the studio. Now." Wayne's voice carried the kind of authority that made people move without asking questions. The Duke was giving an order, and when John Wayne gave orders, you followed them. Fred hesitated only a second, then grabbed his walkie-talkie. "Clear Studio 1. Everyone out. Audience, crew, everyone. Medical emergency." The audience started filing out, confused, concerned, some crying. They had just watched America's most beloved host fall apart in front of them. The crew moved slower, reluctant to leave. They had worked with Johnny for years, some of them for nearly 2 decades. They had never seen him like this. Not once. "Out," Wayne barked. "Give the man some dignity." Within 90 seconds, the studio was empty, everyone gone, except John Wayne, Johnny Carson, Ed McMahon, and Fred de Cordova. Wayne turned to the other 2 men. "You two." "John, I'm his producer. I can't." Fred started. "You can, and you will. Give us 10 minutes. Ed McMahon looked at Johnny, then at Wayne. "Duke, I've known him for 17 years. I should—" "Ed," Wayne said, his voice gentler now. "Trust me. Give us 10 minutes, then you can come back." Ed nodded slowly. He and Fred left through the side door. The massive studio, which had been filled with light and laughter 15 minutes ago, was now silent and empty. Just 2 men. 2 legends. One standing. One barely holding himself together. Wayne guided Johnny to the couch where guests sat. Carson collapsed onto it, his body folding in on itself. Wayne sat beside him, close, protective. "Johnny," the Duke said quietly, "I saw the ships. March 1952. I was on that USO tour. I saw what they pulled out of the water." Johnny's head snapped up. His eyes locked onto Wayne's face, searching. "You were there?" His voice was raw, broken. "Not on your ship," Wayne said, "but I heard the reports. I saw the aftermath. I saw what it did to the men who witnessed it." Johnny's face crumpled. 47 years old, the king of late-night television, and he looked like a terrified child. "I never told anyone," Johnny whispered. "Not my wives, not Ed, not anyone. I buried it so deep, I thought I'd killed it." Wayne nodded slowly. "That's what we all did, Pilgrim. We came home and we buried it, and we pretended we were fine. But I wasn't fine," Johnny said, his voice rising. "I've never been fine. Every single night for 27 years I see it when I close my eyes. The water, the blood, the bodies, the parts of bodies. Young men, Duke, Kids, 18, 19 years old, they were alive and then they weren't, and the water was red for hours and we couldn't. His voice broke completely. John Wayne, who had played the toughest characters in cinema history, put his arm around Johnny Carson and held him while he sobbed. If this story is hitting you where it hurts, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will change how you see both of these men forever. For 6 minutes, Johnny Carson cried. Not quiet tears, deep body-shaking sobs that came from somewhere he'd kept locked away for nearly 3 decades. Wayne just held him, saying nothing, because there was nothing to say. Finally, Johnny pulled back, wiping his face with his hands. "How did you know?" he asked hoarsely. Wayne reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out that old compass. "This belonged to a kid I met on one of those ships. He gave it to me because he said he wouldn't need it anymore. He was scheduled to rotate home in 3 weeks. Johnny stared at the compass. "He didn't make it home." "No," Wayne said quietly. "He didn't." "I was a naval ensign," Johnny said, his voice flat now, exhausted. "Doing reconnaissance work off the Korean coast. We weren't supposed to see combat. We were just gathering intelligence, taking photographs, monitoring radio signals. Safe work, easy work. Until March 14th, 1952. Wayne nodded, encouraging him to continue. "A transport ship hit a mine during the night," encouraging him to continue. "A transport ship hit a mine during the night. We heard the explosion from 2 miles away. By the time we got there," Johnny's voice caught. He forced himself to continue. "The ship had broken apart. Men in the water, screaming, burning, some already dead, some dying as we pulled them out. We worked for 7 hours, pulling bodies from the ocean, some whole, most not. The water was so cold they were dying of hypothermia even as we dragged them onto our ship. I held a kid's hand while he died. He kept asking for his mother. He was 19 years old. He bled out in my arms, and I couldn't do anything except lie to him and tell him he was going to be okay." Wayne's jaw was clenched so tight his teeth should have shattered. "We pulled 47 men from the water that night," Johnny continued. 12 of them survived. 35 died. And for the next 73 days until my service ended, I had to keep working, keep doing my job, keep pretending I was fine, because that's what you did. You buried it. You locked it away. You never talked about it. And when I got home," Johnny's voice was barely audible now, "nobody wanted to hear about it. Korea was the forgotten war. People wanted to move on, so I moved on. I went into television. I became funny. I became charming. I became the guy who made America laugh before they went to bed. And I never told anyone what I saw, because who wants to hear about blood and death and boys calling for their mothers while they drown in freezing water?" Wayne's hand gripped Johnny's shoulder. "I do, Pilgrim. I want to hear it, because I've been carrying my own version of that night for 27 years too." Johnny looked at him. "You saw something." "I saw the aftermath," Wayne said. "Different ship, different incident, but same ocean, same war, same kids dying for a war their country wanted to forget." For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Johnny asked the question he'd never been able to ask anyone. "Does it ever stop, Duke? Do you ever stop seeing it?" John Wayne, the man who'd built a 50-year career playing heroes who were never afraid, who never broke, who always won, looked at his friend with complete honesty. "No," he said simply. "You just get better at living with it." Johnny nodded slowly, like this answer was exactly what he needed to hear. Not false hope, not empty comfort, just truth. "When you mentioned Korea," Johnny said, "when you said you'd visited ships in 1952, it all came back, like I was standing on that deck again, like it was happening right now. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't think, I disappeared into it." "That's what happens," Wayne said. "Trauma doesn't heal, it just waits, and something triggers it, and suddenly you're back there living it again." "How do you keep going?" Johnny asked. Wayne was quiet for a moment, then he said something that Johnny Carson would remember for the rest of his life. "You keep going because those kids didn't get to. You keep going because someone has to remember them. You keep going because the alternative is letting that night win. And I'll be damned if I let one night, no matter how terrible, take the rest of my life from me." Johnny wiped his eyes again. His breathing had steadied. The color was starting to return to his face. "I've built my whole career on never letting people see the real me," he said, "on being in control, on being perfect, and I just fell apart in front of 300 people. No, Wayne corrected. You fell apart in front of me, and there's no shame in that, Pilgrim. Every man breaks eventually. The question is whether you have someone there to help you stand back up. Johnny looked at his friend, this dying legend, who had just witnessed his deepest secret, his most vulnerable moment. Thank you, Duke, he said quietly, for clearing the room, for staying, for understanding. Wayne nodded. That's what friends do. They witness your worst moments, and they don't run. They sat in silence for another minute. Then Wayne said, "You ready to let Ed and Fred back in?" Johnny took a deep breath. Yeah, I think so." Wayne stood and walked to the side door. He opened it. Ed and Fred were standing right outside, looking worried and lost. "He's okay," Wayne told them. "Give us a minute, then come in." Wayne came back and sat down next to Johnny. "They're going to ask questions." "I know," Johnny said. "What are you going to tell them?" Johnny thought for a moment. "The truth. Part of it anyway. That I had a panic attack, that something triggered a memory from my service, that I needed a minute. And the rest?" Wayne asked. "The details, the specifics, what you saw." Johnny looked at him. "That stays between us." Wayne nodded. "Between us. I promise you, Pilgrim. I'll take it to my grave." Ed and Fred came back in, moving carefully, like they were approaching a wounded animal. "Johnny," Ed said, his voice thick with concern. "What happened? Are you okay? Should we call a doctor?" Johnny stood up, steadier now. "I'm okay, Ed. I had a panic attack. Something Duke said triggered a memory from Korea, from my service. I lost it for a minute." Fred DeCordova was already in producer mode. Okay, we can work with this. We'll scrap tonight's episode. We'll tell the audience there was a medical situation. We'll reschedule Duke for next week. Johnny, you take tomorrow off. We'll run a rerun." "No," Johnny said firmly. "What?" Fred looked confused. "No," Johnny repeated. "We're finishing the show tonight." "Johnny, you just had a complete breakdown in front of—" "I know what I had," Johnny cut him off, "and I'm finishing the show. We've got 2 more segments to tape. We're doing them." Ed stared at him. "Johnny, nobody would blame you for—" "I would blame me," Johnny said. "I've done this show for 17 years, 5 nights a week, 50 weeks a year. I've never missed a show, and I'm not starting now." Wayne smiled slightly. There was the strength he'd been talking about, the refusal to let one moment define everything. "You sure, Pilgrim?" Wayne asked. "I'm sure," Johnny said. He looked at Fred. "Give me 10 minutes to clean up. Tell the audience there was a brief medical issue, but everything's fine. Tell them we're finishing the show, and Duke stays. We finish his interview." Fred looked at Wayne. Wayne nodded. "If Johnny wants to finish, we finish." 10 minutes later, the audience filed back in, buzzing with concern and curiosity. The crew reset the cameras. Johnny sat back down at his desk. Someone had brought him water. Someone else had fixed his makeup. He looked tired but composed. John Wayne took his seat again in the guest chair. The director counted down. The red light came on. And Johnny Carson, professional to his core, looked into the camera and said, "We're back. We had a brief medical situation, but everything's fine now, and we still have the Duke here, so let's continue." The audience applauded, relieved. Johnny turned to Wayne. "Duke, before we were interrupted, you were telling us about working with John Ford," and just like that, they were back in the interview. Wayne told stories. Johnny laughed and asked questions. To anyone watching at home, nothing seemed wrong. The king of late night was back in control, but the crew knew. The 17 people who had witnessed what happened in that empty studio knew, and John Wayne knew. He could see the effort it was taking Johnny to hold it together, could see the cost of every smile, every laugh, every perfect response. When the show ended at 7 p.m. after the final guest and the final commercial break, Wayne stayed. He waited while the audience left, while the crew packed up equipment. He waited until it was just him and Johnny again. "You did good, Pilgrim," Wayne said. "That took real courage." "Or real stubbornness," Johnny said with a weak smile. "Sometimes they're the same thing," Wayne replied. They walked together to the parking lot. Wayne's car was waiting. He turned to Johnny one last time. "Can I tell you something?" Wayne asked. "Of course," Johnny said. "I'm dying, Johnny. The cancer's won. I've got maybe 6 months, probably less." Johnny's eyes filled with tears again. "Duke, let me finish," Wayne said gently. "I'm dying, And I've spent the last few months thinking about what matters, about what I want to leave behind. And tonight, what I witnessed in there, that took more guts than anything I ever did on screen. I fell apart, Johnny said. No, Wayne corrected. You survived, you carried that weight for 27 years, and when it finally broke through, you didn't hide. You let me see it. You let me help. And then you got back up and you finished the job. That's not falling apart, Pilgrim. That's heroism. Johnny couldn't speak. Wayne put his hand on his shoulder one last time. Promise me something. Anything, Johnny managed. Promise me you'll talk to someone, a professional, someone who understands trauma. You've carried this alone long enough. Johnny nodded. I promise. And promise me, Wayne continued, that you'll remember those kids, the ones who didn't make it home. Remember them, but don't let that memory destroy you. They'd want you to live, Johnny. Really live, not just perform. I'll try, Johnny whispered. That's all any of us can do, Wayne said. They shook hands. That famous handshake, the one that had signaled friendship and respect for 30 years. But this time, it meant something more. It meant understanding. It meant brotherhood. It meant that one man had witnessed another man's deepest pain and hadn't turned away. John Wayne got in his car and drove away. Johnny Carson stood in that parking lot for 10 minutes, watching the taillights disappear. He didn't know it then, but that was the last time he would ever see John Wayne alive. The Duke died on June 11th. Less than 3 months after that night, Johnny Carson was devastated. He delivered a tribute on The Tonight Show that made millions of Americans cry. But what Johnny never told anyone was that the night before Wayne died, the Duke called him. The call lasted 7 minutes. Wayne's voice was weak, ravaged by cancer and pain medication. But he was clear. I kept my promise, Pilgrim, Wayne said. What you told me that night, it dies with me. Duke, you don't have to. I kept my promise, Wayne repeated, and I need you to keep yours. Get help. Talk to someone. Don't carry it alone anymore. I will, Johnny said, crying openly now. I promise, Duke, I will. Good, Wayne said, because those kids you pulled from the water, they'd want you to be okay. I want you to be okay. They talked for a few more minutes, remembering better times, laughing about old stories, saying goodbye without saying the word. When the call ended, Johnny sat in his house and cried for an hour. The next morning, he called a psychiatrist who specialized in combat trauma. He started therapy 2 weeks later. For the first time in 27 years, he began talking about that night in Korea, about the bodies in the water, about the kid who died in his arms, about the weight he'd been carrying. It didn't fix everything. Trauma doesn't work that way, but it helped. Slowly, gradually, it helped. The 17 crew members who witnessed Johnny's breakdown that night never spoke about it publicly. Not once. Fred de Cordova gave them a direct order. What happened in that studio stays in that studio. Every single person honored that order until the day they died. They understood they had witnessed something sacred, something private, something that wasn't theirs to share. But among themselves, in quiet moments, they talked about it. About how Johnny Carson, the man who seemed invincible, had broken and then put himself back together in real time. About how John Wayne, the toughest man in Hollywood, had shown more tenderness and compassion than any of them knew he possessed. One camera operator said years later in a private conversation that was never recorded, I worked in television for 40 years. I filmed presidents, rock stars, comedians, actors, every kind of famous person you can imagine. But that night, watching the Duke take care of Johnny, watching him clear that studio and protect his friend's dignity, that was the most powerful thing I ever saw. That was real. That was human. That was what friendship actually looks like when everything else is stripped away. Johnny Carson never spoke publicly about what happened that night. In 30 years of interviews after 1979, he never mentioned it, not once. But those who knew him well said he changed after that night. He was warmer, more open with close friends, less obsessed with maintaining the perfect image, as if breaking down in front of John Wayne had given him permission to be human. And every year on June 11th, the anniversary of Wayne's death, Johnny would do something private. He would take out that old compass, the one Wayne had given him that night in the empty studio. He would hold it and remember his friend, remember the man who had witnessed his worst moment and hadn't run, who had stayed, who had helped him stand back up, who had kept his promise until his final breath. If this story touched something deep inside you, subscribe to this channel right now. Share this video with someone who needs to know that even legends break, and that's okay. That real strength isn't about never falling apart. It's about having someone there when you do, and about getting back up. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and tell me who was there for you when you fell apart, who witnessed your worst moment and stayed, because that's what this story is really about. Not about fame, not about television, about friendship, about trauma, about two men who carried impossible weight and found each other at exactly the right moment. John Wayne died knowing he had kept his promise. Johnny Carson lived the rest of his life knowing that on the worst night of his professional life, he had a friend who didn't run. And sometimes that's everything. Now go tell someone you love them. Tell someone they matter. Be the person who stays when someone falls apart. Be John Wayne in someone else's story. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments right now.